Good evening.
Don't count on it.
Good evening, everyone.
Shake the list on the third floor.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the forum at the Institute of Politics here at the Kennedy School. I'm John Turner, the Vice Chair of the Student Advisory Committee of the Institute of Politics, and we're certainly happy to have everyone with us this evening for what is always one of the best events we have of the year, where we have the chance to meet the fellows who are joining us for the semester here at the Institute of Politics. And I'm especially pleased to see all the undergraduates who have made their way down this evening and who will maybe combine the lobster we had in the dining halls this evening with the pizza that will be served afterward after this event. And we're very happy to see all the undergrads as well as everyone else who's here to meet the fellows. As most of you know, the Institute of Politics was founded 30 years ago as a living memorial to the memory of the late President Kennedy. And in keeping with his memory and with the ideals for which he stood, the Institute of Politics sponsors forums, study groups, speakers, discussions, and a number of other activities which are meant to inspire young students here at Harvard to go into politics, to take part in public service, and learn something about what it's like to be involved. And the Fellows Program, I've always thought, is really an embodiment of that mission, as we have the chance to interact and get to meet and get to know some distinguished and interesting people who have been involved in public service and politics before, and they can share their experience with us and also perhaps learn something from their interaction with us. And so it's a pleasure to welcome them. We have, I think, a particularly good group this year, and I think we'll all enjoy hearing a little bit about them this evening. I'm now going to turn the mic over to Phil Sharp, who's the director of the Institute of Politics, who has done a fabulous job, I think, so far in his years here at the IOP, carrying forward the ideals for which the institution stands. And Phil will then introduce each of our fellows, and we'll hear from them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you very much, John, and welcome to all of you to our forum event tonight. I particularly want to thank John Turner, the Vice Chairman of the Student Advisory Committee, Avery Gardner, the Chair, and Brant Wong, who is Chair of the committee that deals with our study groups here at the IOP. Our students are really the critical leaders, organizers, and initiators of most of the activities that the Institute of Politics engages in. And last Saturday they had perhaps the most successful event in anybody's memory here at Harvard, when over 3,000 students were in the Mac Quad for the political festival of speeches, issues, voter registration, and hopefully some fun as well. And I trust some of you had to have gotten there, or we wouldn't have that kind of a crowd. But tonight is an opportunity for us, for the Institute, to introduce to you our what we call the crop of fellows for this semester, who will be residing here at Harvard University. And while each of them will have a study group once a week, which you can partake of, and they will mention that, and then afterward there'll be an opportunity to talk to them individually if you wish. The purpose goes well beyond the study group, because the goal is for students and others here in the Harvard community to have the opportunity to talk directly and individually with these people and gain from their experience in the political process, or in journalism, and in the fields that make governmental decisions. Well, with that, let me quickly introduce our first. We'll go in alphabetical order here. We're very pleased to have with us from the state of Florida, Tom Gallagher. He has served, elected twice to 2 terms as the state treasurer of the state of Florida. So he's held statewide office. He's been a candidate twice for the Republican nomination to the governorship of the state of Florida, and he had served in the state assembly for a number of years. Indeed, I think he was the first Republican from Dade County when he got there, at least in some time, to have served in the state assembly there. Tom?
Thank you very much, Phil. I am from Florida. It's good to be here at the Kennedy Center. I'm certainly enjoying my time here so far. We were all talking about what we should tell you all and how we first got involved in politics, and really what you remember about politics that's sort of stuck in your mind. And being here at the Kennedy Center reminds me of the first thing that really stuck in my mind that I ever was involved in politically was at the inauguration for Kennedy, and to hear him give that speech that has been quoted so many times, and so many of us have heard so many parts of it. And notwithstanding, I still became Republican and was a Republican, and did go down to Dade County and go to the University of Miami and stayed down there. And Florida is one of those states that you don't have to be born there to get in politics. And there are states where you almost do have to be born there to get in politics, because if you're not part of the old clan and part of that group, you just can't get in. And Florida, the majority of people from Florida are from somewhere else. So it sort of gives you an advantage almost if you're not from Florida to run there. Not totally, but in a big community like Dade County, it certainly does. And so I did make up my mind to get in politics back in early 1972. And it was a big year for Republicans, 1972. And I ran in this 6-member district, and it was pretty exciting. And when they counted all the votes, I lost, of course, by about 1,700 votes out of 74,000 votes cast, which was a lot of votes for a state representative's job. As a matter of fact, that was almost as many as the 3 congressmen from Dade County got. And so that voted in that. And so obviously I was disappointed, but no Republicans had won, so it didn't really matter. And then the fellow I ran against died. So they had a special election. Now, times have changed. 72 was a big year for Nixon, if you remember. 74 wasn't that big a year. The governor called a special election. And so the fellow died in January of 74. And so there was a special election, and this was right in the middle of Watergate. And I remember reporters saying to me, you know, how can you be running as a Republican in the middle of Watergate? And I said, well, should we only have a one-party system? Isn't it important to have 2 parties? And so we did have an election. As a matter of fact, the primary was one Tuesday, the runoff was the next Tuesday, and the general election was the next Tuesday, and the first day of the legislative session was the next Tuesday. Now, you talk about getting somewhere green. I want you to know I'd been to Tallahassee one other time in my entire life, and there I was. And everybody else had been there for one session. I was there for the second session of the term. And so that's how I got started. And then I had to run again in November. And each time I was there for 13 years, and for 7 years I was the only elected Republican from Dade County to continue getting elected to the House. It was in House and Senate, there were a total of 30, so there were 29 Democrats and me. The good news about that is that I used to get invited to, you know, whenever they were going to have the chairman of the delegation, they'd always want to hear from the minority, so I was the other guy. And that probably helped keep me in office because, you know, I was the only one that they knew that was Republican, because I was the only one that was. And I didn't have to consult with anybody about what our issues were going to be and where we were standing on them. And so then we managed to get more elected, and now the majority of the delegation from Dade County, both in Congress as well as in the House and Senate, are Republicans. So things do change, and that's in Florida. I ran for governor a couple of times, and I found out that I don't do so well in primaries for governor. I got that lesson twice. The last time when I ran against in the Republican primary, and Governor Martinez, who ended up getting elected governor, won the primary. I became his general chairman, and about 8 months after he was in office, I accepted a job as the secretary of the Department of Professional Regulation. I did that until the fellow who was treasurer, insurance commissioner, and fire marshal, all 3 go together in Florida. It's an interesting group of jobs to have all at once. The fellow had the job, resigned to run for the U.S. Senate, and it set up an opening, and I ran and became the first Republican to ever have been actually elected to a job on the cabinet in Florida, at least since Reconstruction. There's some wild things might have happened before that, but at least since then. We now have in Florida 3 of the cabinet offices are Republican, so a lot of things have changed since I first won that back in 1988. I look forward to working with you all in anything that I can help you with as we go through the semester. I'd also like to tell you that the study group I'm going to be working on is on the devolution revolution. And we're going to look at what it's all about. Are the states and local governments ready for it? What does it mean to the states? What does it mean to each of us? The first part of it's passed, and that's the Welfare Reform Act. Are we going to close down the Department of Education and move it all back to local governments? If so, what are the things going to do to people and cause people? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it the best opportunity that ever happened for people to take on responsibilities and for government to be back closer to the people? Those are the issues we're going to talk about. We're going to have some budget directors in from states. We're going to have an elected Commissioner of Education in from Florida. We're going to have some people that are academicians in these type issues, and we hope to have some fun. Thank you all. I'm so glad to be here with you.
Thank you, Tom. Our second fellow is a columnist with the Washington Post. That's Dorothy Gilliam. She has won many awards in journalism, but she's also served as the chair of the board of directors of the Institute for Journalism Education, and she's the former president of the National Association of Black Journalists. She's also the author of Paul Robeson, All-American. Now, we who have run for office and been in politics are in the habit of having to deal with many more journalists than there are politicians. It always seems that way to us anyway. But at the Institute of Politics, we've somewhat cured that by we only invite one journalist per semester. And so that person has a special task, though I'm sure Dorothy is up to handling the other 5 very easily. Dorothy Gilliam.
Thanks very much, Phil. I, too, am very, very pleased to be here. John Kennedy was the first president I voted for, which tells you something about my age. And so this place has a very special meaning for me. Like most journalists, we also have just a little bit of awe at Harvard. So you'll have to be aware of the fact that we're mean to most people, but we always try to cut a little slack when it comes to Harvard. I was told to kind of tell you a little bit about how I got in the journalism business. I'll try to keep it short, even though it's quite a long career. But at any rate, I have been in daily journalism for nearly 30 years. I started in journalism, and actually I've been in journalism through the revolutions. The first was when journalists were not popular at all. That was pre-Watergate. Then when we were very popular, that was in the time after Watergate. And once again, right now, when we have once again fallen from much grace and are not considered at all as a profession in which many people want to go. I think that journalism is still one of the most wonderful professions in the world. And what I hope to do, and I'll talk a little bit about my study group in a few moments, but I hope that we are able to rise to the challenge of some of the internal revitalization that has to go on. I am a Southerner. I was born in Tennessee, grew up in Kentucky, and my first daily newspaper job was at the Washington Post. This was in the early days when there were very few women and very few people of color in daily journalism. I spent about 3 years rather, at the Washington Post in the early 60s. And then when I started having a family, got married, and started having children, I left the Washington Post and really didn't think I would go back. But a fellow named Ben Bradley became editor, and he wanted to make certain that there was diversity at all levels, and so he hired me as an editor in the style section of the newspaper. I worked in that section until the early 80s when I started writing a newspaper column. I have always had what I consider a fairly non-traditional journalism career, because as a woman, as an African American, I was always struck by the fact that newspaper staffs did not look like America. That was one of the lines that Bill Clinton used that I think we all plugged into it and liked. He wanted an administration that looked like America. The newspaper industry did not, in the 60s and 70s, does not even in the 90s look like America. And so one of my passions has been to try to help make the industry more diverse. And in wanting to make the industry diverse, it is really not about simply getting jobs for African American, Asians, Hispanics, Native Americans, making sure that women are represented, making sure that diversity is a part of the industry. It's not simply about our being in places we've never been. It really goes to the heart of the democracy, you know, and I think those of us who come from backgrounds where our foreparents have died and bled to make America feel very much a part of it. We feel very much a part of the past, and we feel very much a part of the future. But what we find is that when journalism and people who work on newspapers are not reflective of America, what they reflect back to you is not the true picture of what is happening in the country. And so over the last 20 years particularly, I've worked very hard, first through the Institute for Journalism Education, where we have trained a number of students, Asian American, African American, Native American, and Hispanic students to enter the field of journalism. We were fortunate to have put more than 500 people of color onto newspapers and television stations within this country. We've since gone from there to also training people as editors, and in addition, training people of color as managers of newspapers. So that's been very important to me. In 1989, I took a year off and attended the Freedom Forum as a fellow in New York. My thought then had been to write a book about some of these diversity issues that I'd worked on. But midway of that year, I became so convinced, after many, many interviews with some of the leading executives from television and from newspapers in America, I became so convinced that they really did not see the importance of diversity, that they still thought that it was important to have tokenism. It was important to have women in key positions, but it wasn't so important that they run the company. It was important to have people of color in certain positions, but it wasn't so important that they were among the decision makers. And so it seemed to me that some of us who were veterans needed to get involved in trying to bring about change. And so what I did in mid-91 was to run for president of the National Association of Black Journalists, because it is an activist organization, and because we were also planning a big joint convention of all the 4 associations of color. And I'm sure most of you are aware of the changing demographics in America, where people of color now make up about 25% of the population. And those percentages are rising. And it's so important that the American people understand that diversity, and understand that diversity is not a problem, but diversity is an asset, that America is the most diverse country in the world. And how do we use that to advance the democratic goals of the country? And so one of my passions has always been that. For the last 4 years, I have been involved in trying to push diversity in the journalism business, from the perspective not only of making certain that the staffs are more diversity, but also making sure the staffs are diverse, but also helping to make sure that the portrayal is more reflective of America. It brings me full circle to my study group, and we will be looking at redefining the news. And in that study group, diversity is only one small part of the larger picture. Because one of the things that I have found is that people are, as not only minorities are concerned about news and about coverage, that there has been a real concern throughout this country with the way the news is presented. We are finding fewer and fewer people are reading newspapers. One of the groups that we're most concerned about are people just like you, people in their 20s, are not reading newspapers. The viewing of the evening news has dropped dramatically. That concerns those of us in the media business. We know that part of it is because there are multiple ways that you can get both news and information. There's obviously the internet, there's cable, there's so many different ways. But there are some deeper issues. And what I want in my study group is to involve you in helping us focus in on what people of your generation would like to see news of the future look like? Do you want the old definitions that are primarily based on conflict and based on what's titillating, what's new, as we have gotten increasingly, I think, more sensational and sensationalist in our coverage. Fewer people seem to be drawn to that. So there are a number of issues in journalism, and what I want this to be, truly in the context of the new technology, is an interactive kind of study group where you feed in your ideas about what journalism of the future should be, what news of the future should be, and I would like to take my long experience both as a working journalist and with some of the issues that I've cared about a lot, particularly the issues of diversity, and hopefully we will end up having a very good time. So,
thank you, Dorothy. Dorothy mentioned women running the company. Well, we have with us a woman who helped run the company, and the company was the state of Connecticut. She was lieutenant governor of the state of Connecticut. She also ran for the governorship of that state on the independent ticket. So she brings a special perspective to American politics, since there are so few offices that are genuinely independent or party positions in this country, as you well know. She also has served on several positions at local government level in the state of Connecticut. She's done a variety of other kinds of activities, from the Nature Conservancy to serving as adjunct professor at Harvard College for Women, at the Hartford College for Women, excuse me.
I'll take the promotion.
You'll take that, huh? Well, Eunice Groark, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here tonight, but even a greater pleasure is to see how many of you have turned out tonight to hear us and to talk about our various perspectives and how we got involved in politics. I think one of the big things that people are kind of concerned about today, and it's not with your generation, I'm not trying to put a trip on you, it's everybody, is how few people really are interested in serving in government. The skittishness that people have about putting their names up there, what's going to happen to them or their families if our friend like Dorothy here gets a hold of a juicy little tidbit for her newspaper or something goes awry. So the fact that you're enthusiastic, I hope you set an example not only for your colleagues, but for people in my or our generation as well. I have a philosophy that politics is really exactly like a piece of string. You cannot define that except to say it might be something like this. The length of it can vary, the size of it can vary, the color of it can vary. So too can politics. Your experience in politics can be anything. It can be a professional career where you start when you're quite young and you retire when you're pretty old. You can be elected over and over again. You can serve in a professional capacity as a policymaker or a policy developer in a particular department or some sort of a related institution. You can make it as expensive as you want to. You can give lots of money to campaigns, or you can give nothing and be a volunteer. You can run for office. You can work for offices. I don't know any field where there's a job description quite like being in government or being involved with the political world. Indeed, I almost said the political theater, and it is theater. I was really fortunate. I grew up in a household where politics was the name of the game. My father retired when he was fairly young. We lived in a very small town in Connecticut. He got very much involved with local government there, and then he ran for the legislature as a Republican. And he was very successful. He won. And then he was asked to serve as an assistant. In those days, it was called executive secretary. Today, it would be called chief of staff to several governors in Connecticut in the mid-40s. My mother died when I was fairly young, and I was an only child then. And I used to accompany my father when he was out campaigning. We would go from town to town around Connecticut and go to receptions and stuff. And with his always eagle eye at how to cast the frame so that it would look good for everybody there, I was invariably sent to the kitchen, put on a chair or a little stool, and told to do the dishes while the old man was working the front room and getting the votes, and he could say, well, this is a family enterprise. Look who's in the kitchen. I claim that I have done dishes in many, many sinks across Connecticut when I was a young person. I didn't go on and get involved in politics when I was younger. I went to Bryn Mawr and I majored in political science and thought that was kind of easy, and for some crazy twist of mind decided that I would split my major in a Quaker college of all places and have a co-major philosophy of religion, which I used to say you kill them with one hand and you love them with the other, kind of. And that dichotomy has kind of stuck with me all my life. I got involved in politics when our children were little. I was living in the city of Hartford. I was a registered Republican at the time. And Hartford, and this will be useful to you as I go on, Hartford has not sent a Republican to the state legislature nor a Republican to Congress since the early 50s. The voter registration in Hartford at that time, and it's probably worse now for Republicans, was 7 Democrats for every Republican. So when you ran for office in Hartford, the only thing that saved you was that they had a minority rule that on a 9-person city council, 3 people had to be from the non-major party, which before we all became very experimental, normally meant 3 Republicans. So if you ran as a Republican, you were running against your running mates because you wanted to beat them out so you could have one of the 3 slots, because everybody would always run a slate of 6. Well, anyhow, there had been a big fight in Hartford with the Republicans because there were so few, and they were always sort of fighting over the crumbs. And lo and behold, the party chairman lost control of the party and was running a slate and a primary against the endorsed slate. And they were desperate to find people. And how desperate, they called me up. He was a neighbor. I mean, that's how bad it was. And he said, Eunice, I really need someone to run. Will you run? So I thought, I've never done this before. And I always think life's filled with opportunities, and so why not do it? So I grabbed the chance. I said, sure, I'll run. And we won the primary, lo and behold. And interesting enough, I ran as an independent as well as a Republican in that final election when I was elected to the city council. I had no idea that I'd wind up as one permanently. But anyhow, I served 2 terms on the Hartford City Council, me and my little minority group. But I worked very well with the Democrats, and I think that opened a lot of doors for me. But I thought that oftentimes I would take a Republican position. A lot of times I worked with the Democrats. And then I ran for mayor in Hartford, and it was a fascinating election. I ran against a black incumbent who was very strong and thought he had the election knocked. And I had started ringing doorbells in Hartford in August for a November election. The newspaper endorsed him. And then it turned out that 2 people were found coming into his office with a bag of cash of $15,000. The newspaper withdrew the endorsement and endorsed me, and that made the black community so mad because of the white establishment newspaper and a white challenger that they came out in droves and voted like you never saw before in your life. There were places in Hartford where the vote would be 1,900 to 1 or 1,900 to zip. So I lost that election because they just came together. It was an amazing galvanizing thing, and it was a fascinating experience. I then went back to practice law because I happen to be a lawyer by trade, and I get a call from a prominent Democrat saying, how would you like to be the corporation counsel for the city of Hartford? It's the biggest patronage job that the city has. It's just a plum job. And to call a Republican and ask me if I wanted to take this over because the incumbent corporation counsel had sort of a spotty career with parking tickets and one thing or another. So I said, of course, I would love to do that. Why not? And so there was an election, and I managed to conjure up 5 votes on the Hartford City Council to get myself appointed as the corporation counsel. And the story's not over. I did it twice. I'm quite proud of that. And it was a fabulous... And as a lawyer, for those of you that are thinking about law school, to be the corporation counsel of a city is the most interesting job a person can possibly have. It's all civil law, every single facet of it. There was no criminal law involved in my side. in where I was, but it was a wonderful job, and I ran it like a law office. I never got involved in the politics. I never played the Republican. I never played the Democrat. We just went in there and we practiced law for 3 years. And then I was minding my own business doing my law thing when Lowell Weicker, who was the former U.S. Senator from Connecticut, also a Republican, who had been defeated in the 1988 election by Joe Lieberman, a Democrat, decided to come back and run for governor. And he was toying for a while about running as a Republican, but then he decided to bag that, and he was going to run as a petition candidate. You had to petition to get on the ballot. He would be an independent candidate. And he came to me and he said, would you be interested in running as lieutenant governor? Under state law, you have to, in Connecticut, you have to have a governor, lieutenant governor, and they have to be of the same party. And because I'd had so much fun in the corporation counsel's office with no party affiliation, I didn't have to check with anybody about anything I did. I did what I thought was right, and I ran it the best way I could. I thought, my gosh, can you imagine what it would be like to govern this way? So I said, sure, I'll run. And we petitioned, we got on the ballot, and we won by the skin of our teeth in 1990. And then the fun started, governing as an independent in Connecticut or anyplace else. And the issues that arose, we had not one vote in the legislature. There was nobody else in the state capitol or state government any place that was a member of a Connecticut party, just the two of us. And you really had to work the crowd. But you know what? We revised the entire tax system for the state of Connecticut. We brought in incredible expertise in various departments. We had fabulous commissioners from both parties who served. We could pick the plums. And what we learned was that any idea, if it's a good idea for public policy and can stand on its own 2 feet, will eventually succeed, because there's no place else to go. And so we lost some, but we won more than I think we lost. I decided to go back and run again in 94 for the gubernatorial seat. I lost the election. There are a lot of reasons why. Mostly, I'm sure, were my fault. Some had to do with Weicker and how he was viewed at the time in Connecticut. But it was, and there's still an independent party in Connecticut, which brings me to what my study group is going to be about, is developing a third-party campaign. I mean, any one of you in this room can sign up to run as a third-party candidate, frankly. But there are a lot of decisions you have to make. There are a lot of risks that are inherent in it. It's hard to raise money. You don't have a huge party apparatus to help you get the votes, to get the votes out, to find the workers and all that. The people who are going to come and help with this study group have been people who have run independent campaigns. Don't forget, there is a sitting independent governor in Maine. There are 2 former independent governors that I know of in the country, Weicker and the former governor of Alaska. John Anderson ran in 80. We know about Ross Perot. We know about Richard Lamb's interest in the Reform Party. So it's something that really is burbling along in the country in terms of people's interest in third-party candidacies. So I invite you all to come and find out more about the wheres and the whys of being a third-party candidate and running. But beyond that, I close by applauding you because you're interested in this. And you are, and all of us are, what makes this all tick. So thank you again for being here tonight, and I look forward to seeing you this fall.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Eunice. It's now my pleasure to introduce probably our youngest. It's not probably. The reality is he is our youngest fellow here at the Institute of Politics this year, and he's a rising star with a different kind of background in the Republican activists, among Republican activists. You may have seen him on national television this summer because he was the chief spokesperson for the Republican National Convention. Previously, he has been the Director of Communications for Lamar Alexander's campaign for presidency. He served in a number of other positions, including for the senator Senator Tribble from the state of Virginia. And we are lucky that we got him because he's been in demand from a number of campaigns at the national level that would have liked to have grabbed him up. Mark Merritt. Thank you very much.
looks at things, I may not have made the wrong decision not joining some of those campaigns this time around. But it's nice to be with all of you young people. I'm kind of trying to figure out whether I'm still one of you or not. I'm part fossil when I look around the room, although there are some who are more fossilized than I. No offense intended. But the reason that I'm here is because I think this is a wonderful opportunity for me to share with you all here, to expose my southern accent a little bit, the fact that young people are really driving political campaigns nowadays. They're running them, they're offering visions, they're running policy, they're running the television advertising, they're running the polling. They're the people who are, David Wilhelm being a perfect example, who managed the president's race and put Bill Clinton in the White House. Young people are driving politics today. And it's important that all of you know that, A, there's a lot more hope than you think of getting involved and of becoming somebody with influence at a young age without having climbed the normal steps of the ladder which people historically have had to make it in American politics. And also to realize that once you get there, you really can make a difference. It's a little bit disturbing that people think politics is so cynical nowadays, and it is cynical, don't get me wrong. But there's a lot of hope and a lot of people who are really trying to make a difference in both the Republican and the Democratic parties. And don't count yourself out. Don't assume that you can't be a part of that. Don't assume that if there's somebody that you can work for, somebody who's a lost cause, don't assume that that person isn't going to be elected and make a great difference. When David Wilhelm went to Little Rock, Arkansas, nobody thought Bill Clinton was going to be the next president. George Bush had a 90% approval rating, and everybody was writing their ticket for how he would win re-election and what he'd do in his second term. Well, people like David Wilhelm went down there and made a difference and changed things because they believed in it and they fought for what they believed in, and with the hope and inspiration that young people have, it's a tremendous resource for changing things in this country. The great thing about young people is they don't know that it can't be done. They're not jaded yet. And it's important to get involved in the process before you start doing it for money, before you start doing it for career purposes, before you start doing it for stature purposes. It's important to get involved right now, even if it's setting up yard signs and so forth, just to get involved and try to make a difference, because anybody can do it. And I can attest to that. When I was at Georgetown, I was in politics, as most people there were, because it's right in the middle of Washington, D.C. And as soon I got involved running a student organization there. And shortly after getting out of there, I guess it was 1 year afterwards, I applied for a position as a driver for U.S. Senator Paul Tribble, who was my senator in Virginia. And, of course, I had to go through all kinds of machinations to get this driver's job, which, of course, didn't pay much, but it was something. It was an entree to Capitol Hill for me. And I had the humility to be willing to start there, and instead of assuming that I knew everything, I was willing to run policy and change everything without having any experience quite yet. So I applied for this driver job, and I found out that the driver also had, for some reason, the title of Deputy Press Secretary and Driver. So I said, hey, I know a lot about press, good writer, all the usual things people say when they try to get press jobs. Anybody can do it, as you can tell. And so I got the job as Deputy Press Secretary and Driver for my U.S. Senator. Well, between during the interim of the time that I got this job and the time that I was hired, Senator Tribble's Chief of Staff went to the Reagan White House to become one of their top congressional liaisons. And guess who became the Chief of Staff? The Press Secretary. So guess what 23-year-old was entering as acting Press Secretary for a U.S. Senator? Mark Merritt. Now, I say this fully understanding that I didn't deserve to get the job, and I'm not trying to say that I was the best press secretary at $23,000 a year that Capitol Hill had ever seen, but it gave me a start, and I've continued to be in press for the 10 years since then, or whatever it's been, and growing in the business and so forth. And the thing that I would share with you as an example, and one of the things I want to put forth in my study group, is that never settle for just the things that you deserve, especially in politics. I've always gone for things or gotten things that were far more than I deserved, far more than my credentials enabled or merited me to acquire. But that's the way people make it in Washington. That's the way they make it in any business. They continue to bite off more than they can chew, and usually you'll find out that there aren't a whole lot of rocket scientists in any business you get in. It's just people that get involved, are willing to take a risk, willing to expose themselves a little bit, willing to take a chance and take a risk. And that's what I've done throughout my career, and I'm probably one of the rare political consultants that has been continually employed for a decade. Actually, the typical political consultant is typically unemployed for a decade. No, but I've continued to move along from state campaigns, presidential campaigns. Of course, I was just, as Phil mentioned, working with the Republican convention in San Diego, which gets me back to the young thing, if I can make just an aside about young people. I magnanimously took a bunch of my volunteers out of the convention. I was running the media and press shop there, and we had 150 volunteers, and some of them young people, some of them press secretaries in the Senate and the House and so forth, who had come out to work for the operation and make a difference and so forth. But I had gone out with some of the younger volunteers who were in their early 20s, and we went out one night, and finally one of them toasted me in front of everybody. He said, Mr. Merritt, which bugged me enough, Mr. Merritt, it's just so good of you, and we have so much respect for you, the fact that you would come out with the young people from time to time. Cheers. Okay, so I entered my midlife crisis then, and shortly thereafter came to Harvard. So that's where I am right now. But in my study group, I'll be focusing on a couple things. I want to focus in on you, the folks who want to come, and help you professionally and help encourage you on how you can get involved and share with you some of my experiences and how to actually get involved practically in the process. And in any part of the process, whether it be government agencies, Capitol Hill, campaigns, or whatever, and share whatever insights I have there. And then the course will be focused mainly on the media and the tug of war going on among three groups: politicians, the press, and voters. People want news. There isn't always news. But there are newspapers that have circulations that would like to increase rather than decrease, and TV shows that would like to have higher ratings rather than lower ratings. And those people are forced to come up with news. And so they have to create news even when there's not much news. And guess who fills the void? For the politicians and people like me who create stories and things that are interesting, sometimes at least, to fill up the news. In the meantime, as this comes full circle back to the voter who initially demanded all of this news be created and all this information and excitement be given to them, they're frustrated because they can see through it and they know that they're not learning about the real issues that they care about, whether it be crime, taxes, welfare, helping people in need, national security, or whatever. Voters realize that despite their demand for relevant information and for exciting information, that they're just not getting it. So they're beginning to receive less information and retrieve more of it. The nightly news broadcasts and the networks continues to go down, and people are more and more looking into the internet, into talk radio, and other sources that they feel are less corrupted by the process and offer more objective information that they can get a handle on and actually believe in and take as fact, as opposed to something that's been canned in a television ad or in a news story or whatever. So I'll be focusing on that tug of war and what can be done about it, what progress has been made so far. And I'll be featuring people from the Dole campaign, the people who do television advertising, who make the ads, people who develop campaign strategy for national campaigns. Reporters will be included as well to talk about how they cover the races, why they cover it, why they focus so much on backroom politics rather than issues at hand. Why do we read more about the inner workings of the Dole and Clinton campaigns or various scandals than we do about major policy initiatives that are changing the course of America? So we'll be looking critically at that, and I invite any of you and all of you who would like to come to join in, and I look forward to learning from you and getting to know you as well, because I'm sure there's a lot that I can learn that I don't know, and I'm well aware of my ignorance in many matters. So I'd love to get to know you and tonight, and please come to the study group if you're interested. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike.
Well, we turn to another quite different path in American politics. The former governor, fossil, he just said, the former governor of the state of Wyoming, Mike Sullivan, and Eunice Gork was relating the number of kinds of positions and jobs and fights she went through as on a path to try to be governor, and she was lieutenant governor of the state of Connecticut. Well, in a very unusual manner, this gentleman was elected to his first political office was the governorship of the state of Wyoming. And so he has a special path he can articulate to us, and he was involved in many things within the state in a variety of capacities, but he also stands out in the kinds of sort of awards he got, including those of you who know that the Cato Institute is a conservative think tank. The Cato Institute recognized him and one other governor in the United States, especially for their fiscal policy. So he obviously has achieved a special niche in other ways besides just getting there. Mike Sullivan.
Thank you very much, Phil. Thank you all for being here. It's a privilege for me to be able to talk to Harvard students and to share a podium with the fellow fellows. I told them that since our purpose was to interest you in politics, that we ought to try to give a tip every time we talk to students. And my tip today was the first thing you do when you go into a group like this or any kind of a public presentation is you look at the speaking system and see how it works and whether or not it works. And I hope it does so that you can hear me. But I can't see the damn thing. So I don't know whether it works or not. And I'm moving into this high technology. You know, I'm from what we call the land of high altitudes and low multitudes. In Wyoming, I was governor of 460,000 people. That's sort of strange to some of you, I understand. Spread over 98,000 square miles. That gave me the opportunity to have the best political job in this country. I was the governor of one of the 50 states. I had all of the stature and joy and pain of governing a state in the United States, but I didn't have to put up with all of the nonsense. And politics is a bit different. I like to think it's a little different in the West. I know it's a little different in Wyoming. The subject of my study group will be politics in the West, and there's a clarification first off on that, because everyone says, well, you know, when you get to Harvard, when you talk about the West, you're not talking about the kind of West you're talking about from Wyoming. Well, I'm talking about this kind of West. The Intermountain, Rocky Mountain West, and what it is that drives politics and political campaigns and office holders in that area. And I think it, as is reflected by the current documentary on the West, it still is a land of opportunity. It's a land where you have identity. And as a politician, you can't rely upon television buys, and you can't rely necessarily upon the pollster telling you what people want. What you have to do is go out and do what I call retail politics, and that's one-to-one and person-to-person. And I'm sort of an example, I think, of what Mark said in a little different way than he spun it. One is that I am getting more than I deserve. Everybody in Wyoming believes that who knows that I'm at Harvard. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. And if they really knew what it was like here and how much fun we're going to have as fellows over the next 4 months, they would really think I got more than I deserve. The second thing is, as Phil said, I got into politics late. I was marginally involved, always interested in public service and what was happening in my state, but I practiced law for 23 years. And then, as you're wont to do as you're approaching middle age and upper age, I went through a midlife crisis. And my wife, who's sitting over here, thought maybe politics was better than fast cars and women. There was a number of years that she wanted to reconsider that decision, I can tell you that, but I decided to run for governor. I decided to run for governor because I had been raised in Wyoming. I had been educated in Wyoming. My children had been raised in Wyoming, and I thought it was time to give something back. And frankly, I sort of thought that something was only going to be about 6 months, a campaign. For if you know Western politics, in particular Wyoming politics, it is as Republican almost as Hartford is Democratic. And we'd had a Democratic governor for 12 years. So there wasn't anybody in their right mind in Wyoming that didn't think the next governor would be a Republican. So there were 7 Republican candidates and 1 Democratic candidate. I wandered around the state introducing myself while they carved themselves up. And in politics, timing is everything. I was elected in 1986, re-elected in 1990, and just concluded my governorship in 1995 in January. As I said, timing is everything. I made the decision after 8 years as governor that I loved politics and I loved public service, and that maybe I should look at going on to the U.S. Senate. But I struggled with that decision because the biggest risk a politician has is whether you can get through politics, particularly if you've worked your lifetime, or however long that may be, to establish some reputation, some integrity, and some basically status in the public view. Once you've done that and you get into politics, you are always at risk. You're at risk that you'll make a mistake, as you will make a mistake. You'll run the risk that you'll be misunderstood, as you will from time to time be misunderstood. You run the risk that somebody in that great bureaucracy, however big it is below you, representing you, will make a decision that is inappropriate or improper. And fourth, you run the risk that all those folks out there trying to saw off the limb behind you will be successful. So after 8 years as governor, I really questioned whether I wanted to run for the U.S. Senate, knowing that we could leave politics with our relationship, our family, our humor, and our health. Now, if you can do that in 8 years of politics, you've accomplished something. So we were struggling with this decision, and we went to the movie one night called Grumpy Old Men. And I hope that some of you have seen it. It's not about your generation. It's not even about my generation, but it's a good movie. But there was a line in that movie that went something like this, and I don't remember which one of those old guys said it, but he said, you know, the biggest regrets I have in life are the risks I didn't take. And that meant something to me in the decision I was trying to make, and so I said, I'll take that risk. Well, as it turned out, 1994 was not a good time to run for the U.S. Senate as a Democrat. But it worked out all right. The campaign was reasonably civilized, as campaigns are wont to be in the West. I was defeated soundly, but left with a 73% job approval. So, you figure. And I have no regrets, for had I been elected, I wouldn't be at Harvard for the next 4 months. And I'm very pleased to be here, and I hope in the study group to share some of the politics of an area of this country that still has great opportunity politically and economically and professionally, some of the values that I think drive those politics, some of the issues and the traditions. Wolves, water, wildlife, public lands. 50% of Wyoming is owned by the federal government, which changes the dynamics a bit. The need to maintain a vital economy, at the same time protect a remarkable environment. Those are the things that I hope to do and discuss in the study group. It'll include politicians from the West, including, if he lives up to his commitment, Al Simpson, who's our retiring senator, who, as an example of politics in the West, is the brother of the Republican candidate I beat in my first race for governor. And as both Al and I say, in Wyoming, everything is political. except politics, and that's personal. And I hope that we can all share some of that with you, because that's the mission of IOP. That's our mission here this next 4 months, but I'm convinced that all of us will take away a lot more than we will leave. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much, Mike. I'm very pleased now to introduce David Wilhelm. I should say he already got an introduction from Mark Merritt here, which I think is a sign of the fact that in American politics there still is a lot of civility. And the compliments that Mark is intensely involved in the Republican campaign this year has said about Dave, who is involved as well, though more so in the past, in the presidential campaigns. And I might add, last Saturday night, if you saw the debate between the two National Party chairmen, I think most people would agree it was an intense, a lively debate, and yet very civil. And one of the goals of the Institute of Politics is help to remind people and to point out that this country has a great tradition of civility in politics, and it's not all negative and it's not all destructive. And indeed, an awful lot is accomplished by a lot of good people. And David Wilhelm is, along with Mark Merritt, are two of those kind of people who have been very active in organizationally finding ways to win elections and to successfully do so. David is the former chairman of the Democratic National Committee. He was the youngest in history to serve, and since the Democratic Party is the oldest party in the world, that's quite an accomplishment to be the youngest leader of that party. Pardon me for getting that plug in. But he also served as, prior to that time, as the chairman of the campaign to elect President Clinton to the presidency just prior to that time, and he has previously served as a campaign manager for Mayor Richard Daley in 2 different campaigns, and for Senator Paul Simon of the state of Illinois. So he brings a great deal of experience, but perhaps his greatest and most important credential is he is a graduate of the Kennedy School of Government. David Wilhelm.
Thank you. It's good to be home. I was a 2-year MPP, no less. I wanted to follow up on something that Governor Sullivan said. He gave you a tip, a very important tip. Always get a good microphone, all right? I thought since, only some of you will be in my study group, I would share 2 other tips with you kind of for free here. The other major tip. Always rent a small hall.
That's right.
Okay? This is free. The second tip that I will leave you with, and this is an Illinois-specific tip, but somebody in this room someday will get sent to Illinois to be a field coordinator or fundraiser or campaign manager, and somebody from downstate Illinois is going to come up to you and say, "Where's Lincoln County?" There is no Lincoln County in Illinois. You need to know this. You need to know this. We were asked to talk about some of our personal motivations, how we got started in politics. I grew up in a log cabin. I'm getting carried away with the Lincoln thing. No, I was, this part is true. I was born the son of an immigrant to this country. My father is a refugee from post-war Germany. And while he has a healthy disdain for much of the personality aspects of campaigning, as somebody who grew up under Hitler might well have, he always had a healthy interest, even a passionate interest in the substance of politics. And I certainly remember my father would get so mad about Richard Nixon, I'm sorry. He was so angry about Watergate and what he saw happening to our country that he would literally take off his shoe and throw it at the television. How else could a son react to that but to go into politics? I was thinking about what my first political memory was before I came out here. And I remembered what it was, because it was painful. I was 7 years old, and I got into a fist fight with my best friend in 2nd grade because we were at recess, and he started shouting, "Goldwater, Goldwater." And I knew that wasn't right. So I start going, "LBJ, LBJ." He goes, "Goldwater," and we get into a fight, and we get sent home. And I'm
I
like,
told him about civility here.
yeah. Actually, that was a beautiful moment, the whole civil thing. So I get sent home, and I ask my father, "All right, Dad, if this thing, politics, is worth fighting over, why are we Democrats? Why are the Wilhelms Democrats? Why are we for LBJ, for crying out loud?" And I'll never forget what he said. He said, "David, the Wilhelms are Democrats because they stand up for the little guy." Now that's part of my motivation too. I grew up in Athens, Ohio. I'm now known as a lifelong Chicagoan, but I'm not a lifelong Chicagoan. I grew up in Athens, Ohio, part of Appalachia, where I went to high school. It's probably the same thing's true in Wyoming, but the first day of hunting season, deer hunting season, is an excused absence, in part because people need the food. That's serious. When I was 8, we're moving slowly through my life here. When I was 8,
The rest of the evening.
just wait till junior high close. When I was 8, Lyndon Johnson came to Athens to help kick off his Great Society initiatives, and also something that certainly has helped form my political motivation. When I was in high school, I mean, I don't come from a rich family. I don't have a world-famous name in politics. When I was in high school, I started out my first campaign. I worked for an independent candidate for city council in Athens, Ohio, my high school teacher, and he won. When I was 19, I was hired to be Jimmy Carter. This was 1975. Jimmy Carter's delegate selection coordinator in Ohio, largely because I was willing to work for $100 a week. But it was a great opportunity, and everything turned out pretty well. We're moving more quickly here, you can see. I then did come to the Kennedy School, had a really tough time with econometrics. I want to share that with you. I went on, for a while I was a really, I was going to be a policy analyst. I was into public policy. I became the director of a public interest group. We did good work analyzing how corporations didn't pay their fair share, or some corporations didn't pay their fair share of the tax burden in this country. And then the bug struck. And I was asked by Paul Simon to help manage his campaign. I worked for Joe Biden in his 1987 presidential effort. We didn't make it to 1988. I was his Iowa campaign manager. But to show that good things can come out of even tough campaigns, I met my wife on that campaign, who's somewhere over there, DG. So, this politics thing has certain benefits to it. Let's see. Went on from that, managed Rich Daley's campaign, was interviewed after the Daley campaign by a fellow from Boston named Eli Siegel. He interviewed me to be the national campaign manager for Bill Clinton. He asked me where I grew up. I said, Athens, Ohio. He said, "You won't believe this, but I sponsor a national jigsaw puzzle contest there." And I left the room saying, I'm going to get this job. For the weirdest reason, but I'm going to get this job. Bill Clinton becomes president of the United States, and at the age of 36, I'm the chair of the Democratic National Committee. I'm now the youngest ex-chair of the DNC. I ask you, is this a great country or what? This is a time for us to reflect on some of our past experiences. I've done a few things already that have caused me to reflect. First of all, I got the opportunity to speak to the members of the Russian Duma. their national legislature. And they were, of course, amazed that somebody like me would be the former chairman at the age of 39. They were amazed that our party structure was not as any more disciplined than it is, that we can't really crack the whip and get everybody to fall in line. But it also struck me that there's a flip side to the things that they're amazed about. And that is the great ability of somebody who is entrepreneurial, somebody who works, and somebody who believes and has a little luck along the way to really make it at a young age in this country, or to run for the first time and to become governor of a state. This country rewards entrepreneurship not just in the private sector, but in our political sphere as well. I also had the opportunity to speak to the HYPE rally, and it struck me there the power of enthusiasm and energy in a political system to make a difference. Nobody who is cynical in politics will ever do really great things if you define really great things as creating change. Nobody who's cynical is going to get it done. You have to have the energy, you have to have the enthusiasm, you have to have the belief and faith in order to get that done. So I hope that in my study group, where we're going to look at the nuts and bolts of running for president in this country, that it will be imbued with that same sort of philosophy, that politics matters, that people in politics matters, winning matters, but idealism matters too. Thank you very much.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to make a couple concluding remarks, and then we'll open it up to pizza, and our fellows will be here available for you to talk to individually and see if you'd like to sign up for their study groups. We have literature out on the tables as well. I might indicate to you that in addition to our 6 fellows-run study groups, we will be sponsoring 5 other study groups as well, and some of those leaders are here. They're members of the faculty and members of the Boston community, and they're listed for you here. I won't run through that whole list here verbally, but I should mention one in particular. We will have one special study group that will meet 3 times, which will be following the senatorial campaigns in this country very closely, because it will be run by the chairman of the Republican senatorial campaign, Senator Alphonse D'Amato. We will also have the chairman of the Democratic senatorial campaign, Senator Bob Kerrey, here for an appearance as well. So you can be involved with folks that are engaged now and have been involved in the campaigns in this country at virtually all levels. And we hope you'll take advantage particularly of our resident fellows, because it's an opportunity for you to simply get engaged on a more personal level with them. We encourage them. They are interviewed by our students to make sure they are willing and able to engage with the students here in hopes that we can maximize their experience on your behalf. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us tonight, and hope we'll see you all year.